Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your host, Greg Tompsett, and now with my long-awaited partner in crime returning back to me, Aaron Quinn. How we doing?
What is good, my man? I was just telling you off air. This time of year, we have this annual vacation right here in the first week or two of August. This was the first time we took 2 weeks. It was really nice. I think we'll stick with 2 weeks. It's a nice vacation amount of time, but I ramp right up. Like I'm always operating at like a 6, 7 of excitement of being a Bills fan. But as soon as I hit the road to come back to Buffalo, right up to a 9 or 10. Super excited. Been waiting all week to come and talk to you about the Bills because my wife's sick of hearing about it.
Yeah, especially in that car ride back from Maine. I
was talking about the Josh Allen contract extension for like 6 days. She's like, okay, I get it. It's enough.
I get it. You're excited. It's fine. Well, good. I'm glad to welcome you back. We did have some strong pinch hitters come in and try to fill your shoes, and obviously come woefully short. But had a good time. Actually had Anthony step in for a post-game show over the weekend, and but this is the first time I've got a chance to talk to you about the game. But before we dive into that, we had a little bit of news. Deon Dawkins is back. Gave honestly the most transparent and forthright press conference I've seen from any NFL player involving the personal circumstances he went through and how crazy sick he got. Was interesting to hear. I thought he was really genuine and honest about what it was like experiencing everything. But certainly glad to have him back and can't wait to get him back to full strength because, Lord, do we need him on the field with Josh Allen.
Yeah, absolutely. It was an interesting interview for sure. Yeah. I don't know that he should have gone into as much. I don't know if the Bills PR loved him going into as much detail as he went into, but an interesting look into, these guys are humans too. And it's a scary thing for him to go through. Glad that he's come out on the other side healthy and has a positive attitude. I think maybe in the fan base and on Twitter, a little bit was overblown of McDermott's comments. I think McDermott has become a little bit more willing to use the media to make a point, but that point doesn't need to be overblown by us as there's something wrong. We did this with Star Lotulelei, right? During the voluntary camp, Sean was pretty stern in that he wasn't necessarily happy that Star wasn't there, and that and people took that as like there was going to be some issue when Star returned. I think same thing here with Deon. Deon's going to come right back in. He's already, you've seen the pictures. He's already inserted into the starting unit. He's the franchise left tackle. McDermott's not that mad at him. He was just making a point, I think, more towards the rest of the team that we need to take this seriously and we can't afford to have this type of stuff happening throughout the year. But I think that point got maybe overblown when Sean made that comment during his presser over the weekend.
Yeah, and it's certainly, there are very few things that Sean McDermott doesn't have like a calculated, intentional approach to. We joke all the time that he's probably not that fun of a guy. Like he's incredibly disciplined and an incredible amount of intentional planning to everything that he does. And there's nothing he likes less than guys not being able to participate in practice. Yeah. So, is he looking to kind of twist the knife a little bit with Deon as far as like, well, would have been nice to have him here, that kind of thing. I think it's hard for him to unwind that and to take that out of his mind that, well, yeah, look what happened. We would have been nice to have him here. And I don't think it was intended that way. The same comments with Star when we don't know. We'll have to see what he's got when he's coming back. We don't know. He's been gone for a long time. He's got to make up for a lot, especially. He doesn't make those comments about Andre Smith. He doesn't make those comments about Josh Thomas. He doesn't make those comments about, Jacob Hollister. He makes those comments about guys who he knows he can push it a little bit and be able to do that. And Deon is one of those guys to be able to do that. And I love this analogy. I've made the point many, many times. No Deon Dawkins, no Josh Allen. So I had to go out there and try to fight without Aaron by my side. And I learned, just like the quarterbacks have here, that it's tough without your partner.
Absolutely. And I think we saw the importance before we get, I know we're going to get into talking about that game. I think we saw the importance of who Deon Dawkins is to this team. We don't want to play games without Deon Dawkins this year because the drop off significant at that left tackle position, and we don't want to get in that mess. So he's very important. I think that's more probably where Sean's frustrations were, is you're a centerpiece to this organization and the goals of which we're trying to achieve. And I think you hear it in the press conferences from everybody. You hear Starr talking about the urgency to win now. I think everybody knows that this opportunity is knocking on the door right now in 2021. And to have any slip-ups for a guy that's as intense of a planner as Sean McDermott is, I'm sure it bothers him, but I don't think that he's going to bring that over into anything.
Yeah, so last night I jumped on for a minute with the guys on the hoof and went through a couple things. They were counting down some of the most important players to going on a Super Bowl run or anything like that. And they were mainly focused on the more fringe guys of it. But I had joked like, hey, Deon Dawkins might have put himself number one on that list. Obviously, Josh Allen actually is number one. And then I think a lot of people would go to Stephon Diggs or to Trey White or to different pieces. And I actually think you can make a case now that Deon Dawkins might be number two behind Josh Allen on that list after seeing what the line was like without him. He may be the second most irreplaceable player on this roster in 2021. Not that I'd want Stephon Diggs gone, but if you tell me we still have Emmanuel Sanders, Cole Beasley, Gabe Davis, Isaiah McKenzie,
patch that together, sure.
I'll take that over what we see as the options right now at left tackle.
Yeah. Anyone that assumed Spencer Brown was ready to come in and start in the NFL, I think got a little bit of a rude.
Huge fan of Tommy Doyle. Huge fan of Tommy
Doyle.
Yeah.
Tommy Doyle is not also the insurance policy for Dawkins.
Maybe a slow start.
And this might be actually something that the Bills, as we're looking at cuts and waivers coming out throughout the league, this might be a thing because of the kind of eye-opening experience that we had without Dawkins. This might be something that Brandon Beane's really kind of scrounging around the cut pile for a guy that maybe could make that drop off a little bit less severe. I know you brought up some trade scenario to get Ty and Secchi back. Probably not likely, but a guy like that maybe is a veteran that's sitting on a roster that might not quite be the starter, or that team's looking to make some other type of move. There might be a guy out there, and I think Brandon Beane's going to be looking for that here over the next month to add something, because I think the drop-off's too much to risk going forward.
I'd be lying if I said I wasn't poking around a few of the rosters. Not like Dallas. Dallas is in a playoff pushing for their division win. Sure. But I was poking around looking, be like, hey, are there some like reasonably paid veteran tackles on the Texans or on the Lions where like, hey, they drafted Penei Sewell. Do they have a guy that maybe they want to, pawn off and that we can try to absorb to go through? And that's the kind of scenario where you poke around and try to figure out, hey, is there someone, honestly, there is on the Lions. Terrell Crosby is the guy that came up, who is kind of reasonably paid by them. And then you get into, well, they invested, a top 7 overall pick. Is there a chance to go and get him? So I don't know that that's the very next step, or that it's obvious that, Beane's going to make that move, but I think that's the kind of thing that they're going to be looking for to figure out, hey, do we have an opportunity here to try to, shore it up a little bit, get a little bit better insurance policy, and go through from that standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when you look at, this was something Rob Quinn and I were talking a little bit about off air. When you look at how Brandon Beane has attacked this roster in the weaknesses year in and year out, we saw when he brought Star Lotulelei in after there was almost no run support up the middle, right? You and I sat here and talked about there's no way we can replace the entire offensive line in a single offseason. He did that, brought in a whole new offensive line. They've attacked weaknesses over the years. And this one, I think they tried to attack it right during the draft, and that maybe these guys will have a really good month of development, or we still have quite a bit of time.
To say that we're not still encouraged about their future. It's just maybe not this moment.
Yeah, and maybe there's stuff we're seeing in practice that, hey, it was just one bad preseason game and there were some first game jitters and they needed to just get their feet underneath them. I don't know. But I think that when you look at this roster right now, you look at depth, it's deeper than I think I've ever seen it in my adult life. Linebacker now is super deep, which it wasn't a year ago. I feel pretty good about the depth at that position. Defensive back has a pretty decent amount of depth where I don't want to lose anybody other that's in a starter there, but I feel decent about the depth. Defensive line, our friend Ryan Talbot had him keeping 11 defensive linemen in the recent 53 projection. That's a huge number. That means there's a ton of depth there. You have a little bit of depth kind of in the interior offensive line and some pieces, but tackle is a big one where there's just not a lot of depth. And so I don't know, maybe these guys develop a little bit more, but I do think these are the kind of things that Bean is going to be looking to address here throughout the year and hopefully try to find somebody because injuries do happen, man. And I do not want to see a rookie thrown into the fire protecting the asset that we just locked up for 8 years. No, thank you.
Yeah. And there's, there are 3 free agents out there in the tackle market that I think are waiting for an injury for a chance to start. But if, say, it comes to closer to the season starting and that scenario hasn't presented itself, is it possible that they try to call up a Russell Okung, a Ricky Wagner, or a Mitchell Schwartz and try to say, hey, would you be interested in coming in here in a, you get to
Mitch Trubisky role,
a winning culture, still get an active season under your belt. We may need you if something comes up,
checks.
And then you're still making a solid check, and then you're able to go back out next year and give it a shot again. At some point, that may come, maybe not for all 3 of them. I do think that 1 or 2 of them will get the chance to go in and play, but maybe one of those 3 doesn't have that yet. I'm not sure where Mitchell Schwartz is in his recovery from his injury, but that kind of thing I could see happening, that they end up reaching out to a guy like that to say, hey, do you want to come along here? And we'll talk about some of the other guys at other positions. Maybe there's one other spot I could see that, but for the most part, this swing tackle is the only spot I could really anticipate. Maybe they really are kicking the tires on some guys.
And to be fair, Brandon Thorne, who is one of the guys that I respect probably the most in terms of offensive line scouting and how he understands the offensive line play, put out a pretty good tweet the other day, or it might have been today, talking about how hard it is to find good tackles in the NFL, period. To find reasonably good tackles. And the Bills have 2 good tackles. So it's not like this is a position that we're sitting here saying, hey, this is a big urgent need. Some teams don't even have a good starting right tackle. They might have a decent left tackle and not even great starting right tackle. So for the Bills to have 2, one that I think is a franchise caliber left tackle and another one that has the ability to play
starting caliber right tackle.
Starting caliber, at least at worst, adequate right tackle, that's substantial. That means that they've done well to address that position. So we're kind of being picky to also ask for less of a drop off, right, in the depth of that. No roster is perfect, so I understand that, and we might roll into the season with having a big drop off at a position like this, and that's just how the NFL works.
And all we'll be doing is crossing our fingers for what we had last year, where Dawkins and Williams took virtually every snap. We had Ty Nsekhe last year as a very nice insurance policy, and he played 54 snaps, and 30 of them were in that Broncos game when Deon stepped out for a minute. Everything else was, Deon Dawkins and Daryl Williams every single game, just kind of locking
that
it up.
Sweet dark mahogany behind you.
Absolutely. Both of them played over 1,000 snaps and had the most snaps on the team overall. And that's, honestly, what we're going to need again is for those guys to lead us in snaps. So, obviously the real kind of summation of this is welcome back, Deon. Excited to have him back there.
Glad he's healthy.
Glad to see that he seems in good spirits, still putting on some weight. I'm sure he's pounding cheeseburgers and all kinds of good stuff. And getting himself back to where he needs to be. Still a good, strong couple weeks to go, and the fact that he was already out there in 11-on-11 drills at left team, first team left tackle, I think that's a pretty strong indicator that we should be in good shape. And I'll mention,
and until he's ready to play in a game, I don't want to see Josh Allen anywhere near field.
No, so Kevin asking it here. Everything there, like people thought I was joking on Twitter when I said no Dawkins, no Josh, no, that is not a joke.
Nope.
Like, hey, we'll talk about some of the other folks here in a moment. Spencer Brown's still developing. They actually looked really good in run blocking, rougher and pass blocking. Yep. Obviously, we know the beating that Bobby Hart took online. That's not a joke. We cannot roll the dice that, I hope Josh will be okay. No, he cannot play. In preseason, the guys opposite them, especially defensive linemen, they are going all out to make an NFL roster. Yeah. You cannot have a guy trying to earn his livelihood for an NFL contract where hitting Josh Allen is the thing that's going to make him look good. You absolutely cannot do that. So that's not an exaggeration. I don't care about chemistry. I don't care about getting live game reps. Josh Allen should not touch a field until Deon Dawkins is ready to touch a field. And if that's not till week 1, that's not till week 1.
Yep. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So another small bit of news, we did have 5 Buffalo Bills released. Each week, they're going to have a set of releases. So this week, after the first preseason game, they had to release 5. Next week, they'll release 5 more. That'll get everyone down to 80. Then the big drop is 27 guys the following week on August 31st. So the 17th, the 24th, the 31st, those 3 Tuesdays, they're going to have to drop 5 guys. This week, it was 5 guys that I don't know that there's any surprises here. 3 of the offensive linemen, Markel Harrell, Caleb Beninock, Cyrus Tuatele, one of the defensive tackles, Eli Anko, and one of the linebackers, Mike Bell. No big surprises. Nobody that any of us were talking about an outside shot at making the roster. Those are pretty, standard camp body guys. But still, disappointing for them, I'm sure, to see their dream come to an end. And this next week is going to be 5 more. To be interesting to see where those come from. But can't imagine you were surprised by any of the names there.
I wasn't surprised by any of them. I will say I feel like in years past with less depth, and I think this speaks to the linebacker depth that we're seeing and guys stepping up at linebacker, Bell actually had a pretty good game. He did not play poorly, and in years past, that'd be a guy that would be ascending in camp and that you would be talking about how he's going to crack the roster. But when you really look at it, there's just not a lot of opportunities for a guy like that to crack this roster at linebacker, especially with the great special teams players that you have at the linebacker position for the Bills. So that one might be the only one where it was kind of just like, hey, in years past, this guy would probably be somebody I was looking forward to seeing more out of because he had a pretty good game. And then obviously I think fans were surprised that Hart was not part of that cut, and we're hoping for him to be. But offensive line this time of year, it's more of a numbers game. He's going to at least be here up until the finals, just for the fact of rotating offensive linemen, whether fans want to hear it or not.
Yeah, and Lone Wolf bringing it up in the chat here. Eli Anko, he actually signed with the Falcons today. He was there at practice with the Falcons today, so good for him to catch on and be able to get himself a spot.
I heard their defensive line was dominating the Miami Dolphins.
Joint practices with the Dolphins today.
Love to hear that.
Yeah, it's a real shame. I saw Xavier Howard get roasted by Calvin Ridley. Hate to see it. Yeah. It's something where I think this next round, I don't expect a lot of surprises there either. But that final round coming into August 31st, and I know you and I are going to be out at the practice the day after there to see who survived. And maybe we'll wave at some guys. We'll get to that. The vested veterans that could be waiting in the parking lot, waiting to re-sign on the first. Yeah, right. We'll see who makes it there. So this next round, I don't anticipate a lot of surprises here either. But when it gets to genuine cut down day, that one's going to be a tough one. So first bit of news there, Deon back, those 5 guys being released. But let's kind of dive into the game now. And obviously, we've already mentioned his name a couple times. We're not going to go crazy here. Bobby Hart looked bad. I joke that he was the worst tackle performance since Chaz Green had to step in for, Daryl Johnson with the Cowboys. It gave up the 6 sacks to Adrian Claiborne. It was rough. It was ugly. Like you said, he still is a veteran. He's experienced. He's still a body to have there. And that I think a lot of times people throw out there, well, it can't get any worse. Well, sometimes it can. Sometimes it can get worse. And Tommy Doyle was as bad as...
go check out Rob Quinn's feed for some highlights from Doyle. It can always get worse, for sure.
Correct. And, I made the comment on Rob's thread earlier that it's much different. A 6-year veteran 79 games played. Tommy Doyle, his first game out of the MAC. There's a lot of reason to believe that the elite athleticism that Tommy Doyle brings is going to translate at some point. But it was a very ugly start when a guy who's been here for 6 years and was already touted as, whatever PFF called him, the worst offensive tackle ever. And then he looks like that in his 7th year. Sure. That's obviously writing on the wall kind of stuff for it. But, he's taking a beating on everywhere throughout there. So I don't know if you have any official
here's what I will say. I think we talk a lot about how many great decisions Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott have made, but let's also kind of call them out a little bit that they've held on to some guys that we don't think are particularly good. Brian Winters hasn't played as bad as Bobby Hart has, but holding on to him as long as they did was something that people were kind of shocked about. And I think that they value certain things that don't always translate to the field. And Hart, you heard the way Sean McDermott was talking about him. He's always in early. He's working hard on his game. Like he's a guy that they like having around.
Quick, I will say, McDermott hedged his words as much as I've seen him with anybody, that he very consciously only talked about off the field stuff. At no point did he ever because sometimes he'll do his cheap, I got to watch the tape. Or, I thought he had some good plays. I thought there were some good things, but there's a couple things he'd like to have back. He very consciously only talked about off-the-field stuff when he knew that would be a lightning rod.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything he's going to come out there and say that he had a good game or a handful of good reps or anything like that. But I do think, again, I don't want to see Josh Allen being protected by Hart in the preseason, but I don't think there's any harm in him lasting up till final cuts in terms of just unless they bring in some other offensive lineman that gets cut from somewhere else that can be an upgrade. Keep the guy around for bodies. We're getting into the dog days of camp here. It's going to start getting a little bit hotter in August. You're almost a month now, right, into camp. Things are starting to grind. People are really fighting for jobs. This is where camp gets a little bit ugly. You need these big bodies. Deon still got to slowly ramp up his development.
There's no way he's playing Saturday.
Yeah, so this is just more of a, hey, he's a guy that's on this roster and a big body, and we're going to kind of use him around for camp until we don't need him anymore. So fans will continue to be frustrated with him, but this is just how camp is. And in years past, we had a lot of these guys that probably shouldn't have been on NFL rosters and were sitting around hanging out. Now we really have one punching bag that everybody's kind of bullying on. So whatever, he's going to be here for a little bit. I don't think he makes the final roster unless something goes wrong.
Yeah. A more positive note along the offensive line, for anyone who got to see a little bit of the thread Eric put together, Cody Ford looked pretty good, looked spry, moved around well, and was, footwork and his ability to get into space was always my question. He has power. We always saw when he locked onto a guy in the run game, he could maul guys. He's a powerful man. It was always the footwork. It was always his ability to get to the next level, to get into space, to move in zone blocking, to pull and get around into other areas. We saw all those things. I saw him get to the second level on several occasions. I saw him looking for work out there along with the running back on several occasions. If we see a little bit more movement and explosiveness from him, I'm cautiously optimistic about, hey, maybe we actually can, maybe he's never a top 38 overall pick value of a player, but if we get a genuine starting caliber guard next to the, we know what we have at center and the two tackles, I was encouraged by what I saw from Cody Ford.
I think what I said after the game and seeing his performance was, again, I agree. I don't need him to be an all-pro. I just need him to not be the weak link along the offensive line.
But not an obvious weak link.
Yeah, I can live with John Feliciano being what I believe is a below-average NFL starter, and that being the weak link on an NFL offensive line. Every line has some problem or some link somewhere. Maybe not the Bucks; they're pretty good. But anyways, I digress. Yeah,
the Browns, the Colts, maybe the Cowboys. There's 3 or 4 offensive lines that don't have any holes. Yeah. Everybody else has a weak link. Yeah,
and so if he isn't that, and we don't have, the interior having both kind of equally weak links, that's what I was looking for this sort of summer was, can somebody step up and be at least an average NFL starter at their position? And it looked at that part. I think you brought up an interesting point about the footwork. This is something going forward. I struggle with scouting offensive line anyway, but I think every position, I think one of the biggest transitions that people have from college to the pros is footwork. These guys are super athletes. They have the bodies and the build at the most part. I don't think this is 1980s football where they're coming in. I mean, these big college programs have huge weight rooms. They have the same type of training athletic departments. What I'm seeing a lot of the times is the transition of knowing the footwork. Like they know the game, they know all this other stuff, but it's getting that footwork done, getting those fundamentals. And people get so frustrated hearing, Brian Daboll just kept going back to it in his press conference this week, talking about, hey, this time of year, we're just really banging the fundamentals, because once we get into the games, those fundamentals have to be in everybody's head, because that's the difference between winning and losing. And I think footwork is an important part of all of it. Quarterbacks, defensive backs, linebackers, if you aren't nailing that with consistency in the NFL level, you're going to get taken advantage of because the guy across reviews, his footwork's going to be sound, his positioning, his pad level is all going to be sound. And if you're not going to win a lot of reps. So to see Cody Ford get, good pad level, have good footwork, be able to move a little bit in space, all good signs. I want to see more of it. It was against the Lions, so we have to kind of a little bit of take it with a grain of salt. So excited to see if he can do that again and build off of that going forward this preseason, because that could be a big step forward for this offensive line if he is that at least his floor is average NFL starting guard.
And, I think as we kind of talk through those pieces for the offensive line, one other one that has come up a lot was Spencer Brown. And he was kind of almost night and day in a few of them. When you saw him get to latch onto a guy, use his power, use his strength, he mauled a couple guys. He had a couple pancake blocks. He finished some of the run blocking, coming downhill on a few of those, just wash guys out multiple times. Oddly, for as athletic as he is, in a lot of his pass sets, he would overset and get mixed up on any counter move coming back in. Even got beat around the corner a couple times. Obviously, most of the attention rightfully went to Doyle and Hart, but he wasn't great either in pass blocking there. So neither Doyle nor Brown am I concerned with in their long-term capabilities, the athletic profile, and how it's going to translate. There's nothing wrong with guys who didn't play barely at all last year now struggling in their first game as a professional. Yeah. But he did struggle, and I thought there were at least some flashes and things to be excited about, but also, struggling with the other end of it.
Yeah, I think you hit it. No cause for concern. This is a small school dude. Didn't play a lot of football last year. This is, I think Sean McDermott runs some pretty intense practices, and I haven't seen how he performs in practice against I think, good Bills defensive line. But it's a different league for him stepping up to NFL level pass rushers and dealing with that. Run blocking, I think most offensive linemen like run blocking. They like getting involved in that. And so that's probably naturally going to be a little bit easier for him at first. But sort of in that tackle position, sometimes when you're out on an island with a pass rusher, there's a lot that goes into that. And it's a lot of technique. Again, he's got the intangibles and the traits. And we saw Greg Rousseau on the other side of the ball, which we'll talk about, win with just the intangibles and traits and not all the fundamentals stuff, where I think he's going to have to hone in some of those fundamentals, some of the footwork, some of the, pad level stuff for Spencer Brown's going to matter come pass protection. And that will take a little bit of time, I think, for him to learn that. And this is going to be a big project for Bobby Johnson. He's not going to be ready yet. I never expected him to. We talked about it on this show. This could be a 2 to 3 year developmental type prospect. The traits are there. It was good to see him get involved in the run blocking. And I'm not worried about him in pass protection. I think it was something that will develop. I'm excited to see him the rest of this, these next 2 games, get some more reps and hopefully improve on that bad game in pass protection that we saw.
And I'm very excited for those to be the only reps that we see him play.
Yes, with Mitch Trubisky or Davis Webb or something.
Yeah, whatever combination. But that offensive line play brings us to our Uncle Jumbo's player spotlight. So very excited about our continued partnership with Uncle Jumbo's and some of the new stuff. They're making a bourbon. I'm very excited about this. I love bourbon. So going to be excited about that. But our Uncle Jumbo's player spotlight was Devin Singletary. And I loved some of the explosion and the acceleration and what we saw from him. I was pretty impressed. I loved kind of the sense that Marcel Louis-Jacques brought to some of the pictures and his glow up in the offseason of, oh man, he looks ripped. And Marcel was like, hey, I spent a lot of years in NFL locker rooms. They all look like that. But to see it translate on the field in that, he was such a lower end athlete from a measurable standpoint that even a little bit of improvement when you add it to his, really high level contact balance and field vision and short area quickness and things like that, maybe it could be a little bit of a differentiator from him. But I was certainly excited to see it. I thought he looked explosive, and that, I'm excited to have Moss back. I want to have the two of them as a two-headed monster there, but it's certainly a great start from Devin Singletary, in my opinion.
Yeah, I liked what we saw out of him. I don't know that he's improved anything. I think he's back to where he was as a rookie. I think to me, he looked what we saw from him his rookie season. I think there was some of that, again, I encourage people to go back and watch Eric and Anthony break down the run game last year and some of the problems in the run game. And it wasn't all on the running backs. There was problems with the running backs at times, but there was always something happening that was going wrong.
By the way, I love seeing a little bit more of that gap scheme in that first game, getting back to what we saw 2 years ago. I think part of that was not having the offseason and now having the time to put some of that back in.
Absolutely. A lot of the football is such a complicated game. I was on Bruce Nolan's show and we were kind of going through our pet peeves and we were talking about how complicated this game is. Now you can't just get into one specific thing and say this is the reason why something's gone wrong. There's a lot of things that go into it. Scheme's a big part of it. I'm excited that Singletary showed some production. Again, this is against the Detroit Lions, so to take a little grain of salt. And I think maybe people went a little bit too far in that he's somehow now running away with that he's a running back one. And they did make comments. I think Dayball made a comment of, Singletary's availability and was kind of a bit of a shot at Moss. I think you could take it that way a little bit. But I think once Moss is available and back to playing, I'm really excited for this 1-2 punch. If Singletary can be the guy that he was his rookie season, which I don't think is a 20 carry back. I got killed for that his rookie season for saying, hey, I don't think this is a guy that's going to be a workhorse back. I think he's a nice running back by committee running back in the NFL. Sure.
He needs a Zach Moss. He
needs a Zach Moss. And I think that this could be a nice, productive addition to the run game for the Bills, which is exactly what we wanted, just more production. We don't need more running. We just need more production out of this unit. So encouraging to see him coming out and being productive. But to me, it wasn't so much a step forward as it was, hey, this is the guy that we saw in his rookie year. And these were the same types of things that we saw from him in his rookie year. And I'm excited to see that because I think he's a good, well-rounded back. He's good in pass protection. He's a smart back. When he's catching the ball, he can be a weapon in that aspect too. So I like Devin Singletary. I want him on this roster. I want him to be productive. So I'm very happy with him having some production in that first game.
Yeah, I thought it was something nice to see, and yeah, like everything, people go too far with it. And that I've been trying to be steady in the drumbeat that I think he's still kind of 1A. I think a lot of informed people have been out there, with logic to what they're saying, have said, hey, I think Zach Moss could take over the lead role here. Some people have put it out there as much as 70% of the touches and carries. I not only do I think it's still much closer to 50-50, I actually still think it's reasonable that Devin Singletary could have more overall touches, carries, and catches together. And that I still think he's a strong back to have in the scenario that we're in, and I'm excited about what he can do. So I want Moss back. I want both of them there, but I was glad to see that because I've been an advocate of Singletary kind of coming back into what we saw as a rookie, and that I think just having the threat of a running game presence with this passing game can be a big piece of what we need.
Yeah, absolutely. And while we're, I know we're still on the player spotlight, but let's talk about Breida too, because we didn't get to see Moss, but we did get to see Breida. And I think if you just look at the box score and you see what do you have, like 2.3 average or something like that. But there were some nice runs that I saw in there, and he was playing behind a pretty bad offensive line at times when he was in. So that's a tough one to really judge. But I want to see more carries from him. I'd like to see him sprinkled a little bit more into those first couple series, with the starting offensive line a little bit, because I think there's a role for him in this offense too. But I wanted to see a little bit more of the explosion in this first game. And there's a couple times where he had that sort of CJ Spiller-esque of forcing it to bounce outside when it wasn't there. And so I'd like to see a little bit more of him, because this is going to be one. Again, our friend Ryan Talbot had the Bills keeping 4 running backs. He had them keeping, obviously, Singletary, Moss, Breida, and Tywan Jones for special teams. And I don't know if the Bills are going to be able to afford to do that with the way this roster shakes out. I think Breida's going to have a pretty big couple weeks here over the next couple of games to really solidify, validating keeping a spot for him.
Yeah, I think the way you described it is perfect, because that was exactly what my curiosity was. We saw him utilized to his fullest in that San Francisco, that toss sweep that Shanahan is able to scheme. It lets a guy with, whether it's Raheem Mostert, whether it's Jeff Lewis, whether it's with Matt Breida, it gets guys who have that elite running back speed just get to the corner and turn it upfield. And when he can turn the corner, he's exceptional with it. What we saw in Miami last year is, if he can't turn the corner, he's going to keep trying to turn the corner. And that's his move. That's his go-to move. If he was a more versatile running back, the fact that, we've obviously touched on multiple times, he hit the top miles per hour of any NFL player in 2 different seasons over the last 3 years. If he was a more versatile running back with better vision and better cutback ability, he'd be a feature back somewhere. Like, he would be this monster production guy. So he's more fit for this role, but I'm curious, and I really want to see it when we have Dawkins and Williams in there. Can they create enough space that he can turn the corner, just twice this season? Give me a little something. We haven't seen that yet. And if I don't think it's crazy the way you framed it, that if he doesn't get a chance to do that once or twice, do they question, hey, I brought it up before from a numbers crunching standpoint. If RB3 is game day inactive all the time, does it really matter if you're RB3 on the active roster or RB3 on the practice squad? If you're only ever calling them up to replace an injured guy, you can do that from the practice squad. You don't need a guy there. And honestly, if that's going to be the case, and it's not going to be a guy that they find a way to scheme in there 8 times during the year, 10 times during the year, honestly, if we're just doing insurance policy stuff, you could just put Antonio Williams on the practice squad, and I don't know that it's a huge difference. Now, if Breida,
I thought you were going to pander to the Christian Wade stands a little bit there, but I understand where you're going.
Obviously, I was assuming he was already on the active roster.
Yeah, right.
I didn't want to take away from that. Now, if what we hoped, Matt Breida was going to be this chess piece that when Brian Daboll sees a defense that struggles on the edges, doesn't have a ton of speed at the outside, struggles with the contain, and in those games he wants to scheme up 6 to 8 touches for him. That's kind of what I hoped to envision his usage to be. But if he doesn't show a flash of that, then maybe they do have to question, is that a spot for Daryl Johnson? Is that a spot for both Marcus Stevenson and
Damar Hamlin?
Is that a spot for Damar Hamlin and Josh Thomas? Some of those kind of things, all of a sudden you start to ask some of those questions, like, well, maybe we need to squeeze a little something there. So we'll see where it goes. Speaking of some of those receiving targets, everyone's been talking about Jake Kumar. He didn't get a ton of run in the game, but continues to be a steady drumbeat in practice. I'll say that I thought Marquez Stevenson looked solid. Like, he had a couple decent. The speed translates. The speed is real. It's game speed. When you're at 4th and 10 in a game-ending situation, and everyone knows your only option is to go on a fly route, and he still gets by you, that's some special speed to be able to go there. But I thought
he looked. Also, he didn't have big returns, but he looked comfortable in the kick return game, which is that's what I needed. I don't need huge flash. I need him to look comfortable and secure the ball and all those things. And that was a check for me in that first game.
I thought some of the tight end depth looked solid. Both Tommy Sweeney and Richie Gilliam looked okay.
I'm bummed Sweeney's in a boot. I don't know. I haven't heard or seen anything about any extent of that injury, but he had a really solid performance, and it's not being talked about enough, in my opinion, of how good of a performance he had as a tight end 3, because it was good both in the blocking game, and he was the leading receiver up until Stevenson got that big catch. He was the leading receiver in that game, so I was excited to see more of Sweeney. I don't know if we're going to get another look at him here this weekend. Being in a boot's probably not a great sign that we're going to see him this weekend. So disappointing that he got hurt, but I really liked what we were seeing out of him.
Yeah, and obviously don't want to get ahead of ourselves. Not sure exactly the extent of it, but being in the boot's never good. So sometimes that genuinely is precautionary and just to speed the healing
swelling
process. Yeah, to keep weight off it and to be able to help distribute the weight for it. Right. But
we sound like doctors.
I'm good at pretending to be a lot of things. But that certainly goes into it. Hopefully we see a little bit more there. And a couple of flashes from Richie Gilliam. I thought he looked okay, contributing on special teams, truly playing that, fullback role that he really has been for a while now. But again, we already talked about we don't know if they can keep the other guys on at running back, whether you call Gilliam a running back or tight end. That's another one with a tough path to the roster that, in years past, 5 years ago, that guy's our lock for the roster. He made it last year, good story, UDFA, versatility. It's tough to find a path for him this year.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. But also, we saw some improved blocking from Dawson Knox. Still has some stuff to clean up and work on, but and some nice work between Hollister and Knox in the run game and blocking. So those are all positive signs. I've been pounding the table while everyone's concerned about the drops for Knox. My biggest concern this year and the step forward that I wanted to see from him was not being a liability in blocking and being able to put him out there in run situations and keep the defense on their toes, because regardless of his statistics and the perceived problems of the drops, defensive coordinators have to account for a guy with the athleticism of Dawson Knox at the tight end position, because at any point he can make an explosive play from that position. So the guys are accounting for him. But if you put him in there and he's going to be a liability in run blocking every time, then defensive coordinators are going to take that opportunity on first down, second down, where you're more likely to be in a run scenario. So for him to take that, that's the big step that I'm looking forward for him taking. That's something I'm going to keep an eye on here going forward through these next couple of preseason games. Was that just a game against the Lions where he played pretty well, or has he truly improved as a blocker? Because that would be a massive step forward for him in keeping his ability to stay on the field more often and be a true tight end one in this league.
Well, and you talk about how coordinators have to plan around him. His issue is consistency. He makes a lot of the tough catches when they're covered, when he's between guys, when he has to go up and, make those 50-50 ball catches. Defense coordinators have to plan for that. Now, yes, do we also get a couple frustrating wide open drops, which again is what we've seen in camp thus far. Some awesome highlight reel catches, and then some reports of, hey, wide open in the end zone, and Dawson Knox dropped the ball. That's kind of, 3 years in, maybe that is who he is.
Might be.
But I think your point is well taken in that if he can really shore up the blocking and still have the athleticism to threaten the defense, maybe we're not stumbling upon some magical Darren Waller tight end and that he's going to explode.
He's not going to become George Kittle, maybe.
Correct. Right. But maybe he becomes serviceable enough until we, make an investment to try to find that guy. He can still be a piece of this team and a piece of what we need.
Would encourage people to look at George Kittle's drop percentages over his 4 years. He's had similar to, not as bad as Knox's rookie year, where Knox was like 20%, but the two of Kittle's 4 years, and we all consider Kittle to be one of the top elite weapons. He's been like 14 and 16 or I think percent drop rate in 2 of those years. So this isn't just Knox is just completely terrible. There's other guys that we consider to be good, productive tight ends that have similar drop rates. I think it's to what you said is where those drops come and that they feel more frustrating. It's more of an emotional, like, God, you got to catch those. But I know that might be who he is, where his drop rate doesn't change all that much. He might have a good year or two, but that this might be a lingering problem for him going forward. But he's still the best, especially if he's improved in the run in his blocking. He's still probably the best and most athletic tight end the Bills have.
Oh, for sure. He's still the best one on the Bills. And Massive Park here bringing up Kelsey has it as well. And honestly, kind of sneaky Stephon Diggs does too. He has a couple of those like just boneheaded ones. Like, oh, that's weird. Now he has so many targets that it didn't matter.
Yeah, right.
But it's he's not alone in that fact. It's just frustrating.
It is.
In the way that it happened.
Totally.
One of the highlights of the game and one of the things I'm really excited to see in this next game was how much the stories that we heard And the reports that we heard in camp, when you're not sure, hey, is it just because you're going against Caleb Benenoch? Is it just because you're going against, Markel Harrell? Hey, those guys aren't on the roster anymore. Is it just because you're beating up, Bobby Hart in the open practice at the stadium? We saw that the defensive line reports and drumbeat that we heard through camp was valid and was real. And we saw a lot of flashes, and that Greg Rousseau rightfully got some positive attention for the sack on Penei Sewell right off the bat, and a couple other plays. Had a kind of a sandwich hit with the quarterback with Epinesa, but AJ Epinesa had a couple flashes, and man, Efe Obada just over and over again. Talk about a dude that's going to be hard to keep off the roster here.
I've been saying it.
Big favorite of yours.
Been saying it.
I thought the defensive line looked Harrison Phillips. I thought the defensive line in general looked really strong.
Yeah, and we didn't even see really what I think is going to be the starting defensive line, right? We saw no Jerry Hughes, we saw no Mario Addison, we saw no Star Lotulelei. That's probably your three most veteran, maybe not, I think probably the three best defensive linemen on this team, at least historically that we've seen. Yeah.
Maybe we see some flashes from the younger guys.
And I honestly think that it's weird because of how Rousseau had the flash and he looked good. He looked the part. I think fans are forgetting about a guy like Jerry Hughes. Like Jerry Hughes is still very much the best defensive lineman and the most disruptive defensive lineman.
65 pressures last year.
Yeah. And I think we're just forgetting how good Jerry Hughes is. And when he comes back, this depth is what excites me. And I'm on board with Ryan Talbot's prediction of keeping 11 defensive linemen because last year, this was the biggest problem for this Bills defense, was establishing any type of pressure, any type of consistency along the defensive line. Big believer you win the game in the trenches. I think the Bills lost the game in the trenches against the Indianapolis Colts, and they should have probably lost that game. And I think they lost the trenches against the Kansas City Chiefs, and that's why they lost that game. Yep. And if you can establish some dominance in the trenches and have depth to do that consistently throughout the year, you're going to win a lot of football games in this league. And to see Harrison Phillips, he should have got the most praise on that Greg Rousseau sack. We've been talking about Greg Rousseau all week ad nauseum. I've seen everybody just highlighting that, and that's fun because Rousseau's a shiny new toy. We love shiny new toys. I'm a big fan.
Everybody likes first round picks. They do well.
Yeah, I love shiny new toys. Give me them all. But that sack happened because of Harrison Phillips bull rushing his guy, not allowing Goff anywhere to step up. All that matters. That's everything goes into sacks. It registers as an individual stat, and sometimes a sack is an individual stat, but a lot of the times, and we saw this with Jerry Hughes pressures a year ago, Hughes got the pressures, got quarterbacks off their spot. There was nobody there to, collapse the pocket or the quarterback was able to step up because there wasn't a Harrison Phillips there pushing his guy back. So to see everybody playing, and I haven't even gotten to Obada yet. Obada had a fantastic game. I love seeing him line up a little bit all over. He got washed a few times in the run game, as did Rousseau.
So did Epinesa, so did Rousseau.
Yeah. And, everybody on Bill's Twitter was just, hey, Rousseau beat Penei Sewell. Yeah, and he did. Pick, and he did, but Sewell got him a few times in the run game. There's a few clips where
I had a couple Lions fans come out and be like, yeah, he handled him most of the rest of the snaps that they were both in there.
Yeah, he got washed a few times. That's going to happen. I'm okay with it. I'm just saying we probably should have been more objective in calling out the other side of that too. But I'm really excited with Obada. And when we went over this defensive line, I said, this is going to be a guy that's going to be really hard to keep off the team. I think everybody assumed he was brought in before the draft, and then they went edge, and that was kind of his death sentence. That numbers-wise, historically, they don't keep that number of defensive linemen, but I think that he's going to make them keep an extra guy that they wouldn't otherwise keep because I think he has an important role in this defense. I think you see that in what they were trying to accomplish with him in this first game and putting him all over a little bit. And I think he probably had the best performance on the defense, maybe outside of Andre Smith. I think that he really just played with a constant motor, got after it. Even the penalty against them was a little bit low, but I don't mind that type of, he played all the way through that play. That's what I want to see out of a guy like that. And I'm excited for him in a rotational role, Harrison Phillips in a rotational role, and even Ed Oliver had some disruptive plays that aren't getting talked about enough. He didn't get any big splash plays, but he's still super disruptive. And I think that this defensive line is going to be a shining unit for this team. And we haven't even seen Star Latulippe. You heard Leslie Frazier talking about Star Latulippe being the like bright spot of the training camp for this defense, and that they didn't even need to see him out on the field because they're so happy with him. So Brandon Beane, again, hats off to him. This unit was a unit that hurt the team a year ago, and they attacked it, and they've gone after it to make it better, and they're developing their own guys. And this is a unit that I'm super excited to see. And I kept saying, hey, it's against the Lions. But if there's a strength of this Lions team that they played, it's right there on the offensive line. For sure. So this was a great opportunity to see them displayed on that. And probably going into this week, I think what I'm hoping Fields plays a little bit earlier than he did last week, because I want to see how this defensive line works with a mobile quarterback, because that's what we need, is a guy that can extend plays and that you can still cover him, because that's what killed him with a Patrick Mahomes type guy, is somebody that can get out and extend plays. And that's what Fields is. So that'll be a good test if they can, have the same type of production and disruption that they had against the Lions against a more mobile quarterback.
Yeah, seeing it against Taylor Decker, Frank Ragnow, Penei Sewell, like their line is legit in how they're built, and I think Fields is going to be an awesome test to see if that athleticism translates. I thought Ed Oliver had a couple nice flashes. He was there creating the pressure on a couple of those sacks. He only got, I think,
taking on double teams at his size. He's incredible.
Yeah. He only had 2 drives, so there wasn't a ton to see there. And I'm really curious to see how the coaching staff is going to handle the upcoming game, in that what are they going to treat like the third preseason game previously, where the starters would play like the whole first half and maybe the first drive of the second half. Is that going to be the second one now? Because it's obviously not going to be Josh or Deon Dawkins. So does that mean Diggs they hold off for everybody? Diggs actually missed a semi-concerning amount of practices.
That might be another episode. Are we worried?
We'll decide next week in next week's show if he hasn't come back and practiced yet. But I saw,
I'm trying not to be worried. But
Dan Fetz and John Scott both officially said something today like, hey, this went from nothing to maybe something. Like, it's just it's a 6th practice. You missed 6 practices in a row. It's something. Like, hey, and now I hope they're being way overcautious, way over careful.
Yeah, because we didn't see Hughes for a little bit too.
Yeah, and then we just don't need to push anything, but 6 practices is still. Sean McDermott does not like for people to miss 6 practices. How about that? I think that's a way that he would want to handle it. So, I thought you mentioned Andre Smith earlier. I thought the linebacker depth showed up pretty well. Tyler Matakevich even made a couple nice plays. Terrell Dodson showed well. Terrell Adams showed well. But obviously, I think the star of the show was Andre Smith. You talk about a guy that they traded for last year, wanting to acquire him, and then played. In the 11 games he played as many special teams reps as Tyler Matakevich, so it looked like he was 5th in special team snaps. He was actually 2nd in special team snaps per game. A guy that he might be playing himself close to that lock area, in that, if you're going to be able to play that level of backup linebacker and you're a core special teamer, that has value now. And I brought it up before with Daryl Johnson. I get the 4 phases of special teams. He's still a minus as a defensive end. So if he starts to take a step forward, we didn't talk about him with the defensive line play. If he now shows a little bit more at the line of scrimmage besides special teams, that gives him a leg up as well. But I thought Andre Smith showed well, but overall the linebacker depth I thought was impressive.
I'll go a step further. I think Smith's a lock for this roster. I think you mentioned how often he was on special teams, and we've heard reports that he's been playing like we saw in the game throughout training camp. And I think that they saw last year how fragile that unit was at linebacker, where they had to sign Darren Lee off the street to hope that maybe you could stop the bleeding that we saw with AJ Klein. And so I think that this is another thing that they are sort of going into the season trying to make sure that they have the depth at that position. I think I'm willing to say that he's a lock for the roster. But at some point, this was something we sort of talked about in the Slack channel, how many of these core special teams guys are going to be locks. We heard Leslie Frazier talk that Bam Johnson is a core special teamers, and everybody associated, Frazier said he's a core special teamer, so he's going to be a lock too. And we assume Tyler Matakevich is a lock, which I do think he is a lock. Yeah. And a lot of people think Tywan Jones is a lock because he was called out as of being an elite gunner in the NFL level. And obviously Sarah Neal is another guy that they talked about being elite. Brandon Beane specifically spoke to him being elite at his position.
And
so
Jake Kumar plays 4 phases of special teams.
4 phases of special teams. So you have a lot of guys that some of them aren't necessarily contributors, but if a guy like Andre Smith can also prove that he can be a contributor at a position, that totally locks it up for me.
Yeah. Well, and now you start talking about, okay, Medikevich and Smith looked okay at linebacker, plus they could play special teams. And then you talk about Jake Kumro's looking pretty good at wide receiver, and he gets to play special teams. Saran Neal.
Sorry, Tywan.
Okay, I don't know if it's quite that clean and simple, but it starts to become a tiebreaker that, hey, they thought they didn't have another gunner, but maybe Jake Kumaro can be the gunner opposite Saran Neal and then also contributes. It becomes interesting. Does that become an opportunity that they need to look at? And we'll see where it goes. But I think that it's maybe more in question, and that if Daryl Johnson and Andre Smith are taking a step forward in how they play at the line of scrimmage, all of a sudden now that becomes a tiebreaker when they're also big-time special teams contributors. Yeah. Some of the guys who needed that path and needed to be, developing at the line of scrimmage but contributing on special teams, man, look kind of rough in the secondary. I thought that we'll separate corners and safeties. I thought safeties looked okay, and I thought the corners kind of struggled. Sure. At the depth level, we saw both Elijah Griffin and Rashad Wildgoose get roasted and miss tackles. And that's a dangerous cocktail when you're trying to make a roster. I thought both of them looked not ready for the moment in what they were doing. Before we get to some of the other corners, the depth at corner behind the competition at CB2, I thought looked maybe a little bit concerning.
Yeah, I mean, it's not concerning to me because it's kind of where I expected it to be with these players. I mean, you're talking about an undrafted free agent, which is even though we saw Levi be able to be an undrafted free agent, come in and produce for this team, that's a very rare thing, especially at quarterback. It's a big jump for corners to come into the NFL. So I wasn't expecting Griffin to come in and light things on fire. Wild Goose, we know, is a project, right? Like, we know that this guy has athletic ability and he's flashed on tape at times in college, but this isn't a guy that was a refined cornerback or anyone that teams were drooling over to get their hands on. This is a guy that is going to be a developmental guy. And if you can turn some of those traits and kind of harness that aggressiveness that he has, then great, maybe that'll work out. But these were two players that I was not expecting anything of in 2021. And I am concerned about the lack of depth, but this is the league. We talked about it last year with everybody wanting to replace Levi Wallace. And I say, look at other teams throughout the league. This goes back to where we're talking about offensive lines, of how many, there's 3 or 4 offensive lines in the NFL that are solid at all 5 positions. There's not a lot of teams that have 2 lockdown cornerbacks. And when you get past the 2 starters, a lot of the CB2s are Levi Wallace's around the league. He's probably on par with his peers at CB2 league wide. I think he's probably a pretty decent one. Warren Sharp seems to think it was a great signing by the Bills to bring him back because he's a productive CB2. And so once you get past CB2, though, it gets a little hairy all around the league. And that's where you find your guys like your Daryl Worleys, like we saw last year, who just can't really cover top flight NFL wide receivers. So you hope some of these young guys can develop, but I don't know that we should anticipate a whole lot behind Dane Jackson as far as productive guys. If we get to the point in the season where Levi Wallace is out, Dane Jackson's out, we're screwed anyway. I don't think there's a lot of scenarios where you're going to pull a guy off the street that's going to come in and play. Maybe a Josh Norman. You can bring in a Josh Norman type guy, or maybe Richard Sherman deals with whatever his issues were off the field and that's all cleared up and you can bring in a guy like that. But cornerback is league wide. You can't have enough of these guys. I'm on board with Bruce Nolan wanting to draft multiple corners every single year because of this reason. You can't have enough depth at this position, but I don't think this is a problem specific to the Buffalo Bills. I think this is something all teams struggle with outside of their corner. You get those first 3 corners and after that, man, it's just kind of up in the air of developmental guys.
Yeah, and Scott here asking, I think that it's a interesting question. I feel like Deon Dawkins and Darrell Williams are better than Levi Wallace. I think they're better tackles than Levi is a corner. Not by a lot, but maybe a little bit. And then I think Dane Jackson's a little bit better than anybody we have at backup tackle. So the question of depth is a little bit different. The drop-off is way more severe at tackle. At corner, at least we have a third guy that I think Dane Jackson is obviously still developing, probably not pushing Levi Wallace for a starting spot as
Missed
much.
a couple tackles. I was bummed because he was a solid tackler in his performances a year ago when we saw him. But I saw him miss at least 2 in this last game, which I want to see kind of get better. But you're right. I think that the drop-off isn't massive from Levi to Dane if we get into that bind.
Our scheme with having the other 4 guys in the secondary with Hyde, Poyer, Trey, and Taron Johnson, and then the coverage ability of the 2 linebackers, we can hide a corner. We've hidden worse corners than Dane Jackson. We survived with Sharice Wright for a little while. It's feasible to survive in that scenario. I will say, the one knock that Levi Wallace had was, he was steady, consistent, but didn't make a lot of plays on the ball. That play in the end zone was going to be a touchdown pass, and him jumping up and knocking away that ball, that was a big time play. That was, I don't remember a ton of those over the last 3 years with Levi Wallace. It was a lot of sound tackling, not letting up yak, and avoiding balls coming to him. But it was kind of nice to see him go up and make an aggressive play on the ball. And if we're going to see more of that, maybe we don't need to worry about starting corner as much as people think.
I don't think we do. I think you look at Levi's body of work and the overall holistic view of that defensive backfield with him in it and what they've been able to produce in terms of DVOA, in terms of just successful against the pass. 2 years ago, we were talking about how this passing defense gives up no big plays, the fewest big plays in the NFL. And Levi Wallace was a part of that. And while he gets picked on at times, you have Trey White across the corner, and wherever he rates in the NFL 100, I don't care. He's one of the better cornerbacks in the NFL. And definitely if you're in a matchup against the Buffalo Bills, if you have to pick a spot to throw, you're going to keep an eye on where Trey White is and try not to throw there if you don't have to, because he's
Jalen Ramsey had him as his 3rd best corner in the league.
Yeah, he's right there. And the things he does in zone defense are just so special. It's so different than a lot of these cornerbacks when you think of top lockdown corners. He's just such a different level of player. But I think Levi gets such a bad rap among the fans. But you're right. If he can show the ability to attack the ball and play the ball in the air, that eliminates a lot of the problems that people had with him. He's never going to become a better athlete. He's sort of limited where he is as an athlete, but you can make up for that. He's got great length. He's always in position. And the thing I like most about that play, a lot of people were saying, hey, that's a defensive pass interference because he grabbed the shoulder a little bit. But I loved how he had turned his head right at the spot and swatted that ball out of there.
That gets called 25% of the time.
Yeah, I wasn't worried about that. And I like to see what we saw out of him. We know he's an efficient tackler. I'm a big fan of Levi's, and I think seeing him run away with that job this year is only a benefit for the Bills. I know a lot of people wanted Dane Jackson to win that position. I want continuity. We just talked about it. This team plays a lot of zone. We were talking about it a little bit on Twitter with Eric and Taron Johnson and his importance to this defense. And when Matt Milano went out, I think you saw the struggles because you need continuity in this Sean McDermott, Leslie Frazier scheme, especially when they're playing heavy zone coverages where it almost has to be seamless communication. Levi's expected to be where he's going to be, and Hyde and Poyer where they're going to be, and just knowing that the player next to you and having those reps. 4 years now we're going into with this same unit. That's priceless. And to just want another piece because you're not happy with the guy, even though he's performed well, just seems silly to me. I want continuity because this is a good defense when all these guys are healthy and playing. But it was a good sign to see Levi make a play on the ball in a big spot in the end zone, in the red zone. And if he can continue to do that, I feel much more comfortable with him. But I think his floor is right where you want cornerback to, right with his peers league-wide. I don't think they're ever going to be one of the best cornerback duos in the NFL, but consistency matters, especially to the coaching staff. Yeah,
and I, Williams' comment here, I don't know if I'd go as far as Hyde, but better pressure from the front seven inarguably benefits the coverage. People get into those debates. What's more important, pass rush or coverage? The the inarguable part of that is they help each other. When you have better coverage, it's easier to get home on a sack. If you get home early in your pass rush set, then it's easier not to have to hold coverage as long. They go hand in hand.
I hate the argument of one's more important than the other. You need it all. From down to down, it changes. Right? Like everyone has to be solid. It's Sean McDermott says it. Everyone hates these cliches, but it's 1 of 11. If everyone's doing their job, it helps everybody.
Yeah. So we'll see where that goes. And, our final, kind of position group here, the safety play I thought was pretty solid. I liked Jaquan Johnson. I liked a lot of what I saw from Josh Thomas. He flashed several times. I thought DeMar Hamlin looked good. I was pretty impressed with the safety play, and that's maybe not a position I expected to feel that good about. But I thought they presented themselves really well. I thought Josh Thomas came up in run support several times, and he's a guy that, we talked about Ryan Talbot's 53-man projection. He had Josh Thomas making the roster, and I don't know that I have him over DeMar Hamlin at this point, but if he's going to throw his body around like he did in that game, I see why Ryan projected that. It feels less crazy after seeing him in that game.
Yeah, I want Hamlin on this roster. For me, Hamlin just fits the mold of the Poyer.
A little bit more of a draft investment, and that there's a longer term contract value. I will be shocked if DeMar Hamlin is released.
Yeah, and Hamlin just feels like a guy that's primed to eventually take over when we lose one of the two guys that we have there in Poyer and Hyde eventually down the road. He just seems like a poor man's version of those guys now. And I think that's what I felt when we were watching the safety play, and some of the clips that Eric posted of the all-22 of safety play was these guys feel like poor man's Poyer and Hydes, which is exactly what I want in the depth of safety. I don't want to lose either one of those guys in the season. I think if those are some of the most important things. If we lose Micah Hyde or Jordan Poyer, I feel real. I don't feel good. I have a lot of anxiety about any matchup that the Bills are playing in. But if you have some young guys who sort of remind you of these two, it's probably the best safety tandem in the league, and have similar traits to these guys, then I'm all for it, because I think those two guys are also great leaders and will help develop these young safeties. And I think that, we talk a lot about the wide receiver room being a great room to be in. There might not be a better safety room to be in to learn the safety position than this room, especially with how the Bills use safeties to disguise their coverage. This is a great opportunity for these young guys to learn from two of the best in the business, and really excited with what we saw from them in that first game, and super excited to see that battle going forward, because I do think there might be some tough decisions of how many safeties they're going to keep, especially with the lack of depth at corner. That could get interesting here with the defensive backs, but encouraging to see nonetheless.
Yeah, and I think Ron makes a great point here that if I was going to challenge anything on Ryan's 53-man roster, it would be, if you have to ask me who do they have a better chance of passing through waivers and sneaking out of the practice squad between DeMar Hamlin and Josh Thomas, it's probably Josh Thomas. Like, they have a better chance of sneaking him through waivers and getting him on the practice squad and just, using the call-up options they have now to be able to do that. So we'll see where that goes, but I thought it was there. And one final piece, I loved the special teams pretty much across the board. We had nice coverage, didn't let up any kicks. Tyler Bass looked
still
fantastic,
doing work.
Crushing the ball, hitting. I love they asked McDermott about this in the presser. You can't really simulate game-winning kick pressure, and I know it's preseason, it's not the same thing, but his heart rate's still up. It's still a pressure moment. It's still it was a legit, a 47-yarder to win it, or 42-yarder, one of the two.
Something,
But still a legit kick in a pressure situation. Love to see that, and man, you could not ask for a better debut than Matt Hawk had. Every single one inside the 20, great hang time. The one was a
consistency,
rocket. Baby. Just no bad kicks and putting them where they wanted, helping the coverage. That's why they pivoted over to him from Corey Bojorquez. And that, I'll miss Corey. I'll pour one out for him. But certainly was reassured with what Matt Hawk had there. And we touched on earlier with Stevenson. McKenzie looked great in his return opportunities. And the one, Brandon Powell obviously was kind of, pressing, forcing it a little bit, but I can respect that. A guy fighting for a roster spot, trying to make something happen. It is what it is. But
I think the most impressive one from McKenzie is the one he didn't return. It was a short kick, and having the heads up to not press and not play that and try to earn the job in the preseason and show a heady play, because that stuff matters, man. I don't want to get on the post-game show this year and talk about special teams errors and lack of consistency on special teams. I don't want to talk about special teams at all, except for, hey, this was another great consistent game from that unit. That matters more to me than the big plays. I got in an argument this offseason with people talking about, well, we need McKenzie because he returned a touchdown, and that's huge to have that. Yes, it is, but it's super rare to have returns for touchdowns. Like, you want to have some good field position and good plays, but you really want a smart, heady player that's going to have ball security and be consistent at that spot more than anything else. And if he can prove to be that, then I'll definitely be wrong in me saying that he doesn't have a spot on this roster. I think he's already probably ruined my hot take for the summer, and I think he'll have a spot on this roster, but showing that consistency in the game and showing that he's a heads up returner is only benefiting him.
Kevin's comment here, I will say the reason I don't quite think it's crazy is because Tyler Bass didn't do one shout out post for Reed Ferguson and Corey Bojorquez once all year last year. And after the first game, he did one of, man, what perfect execution. Got to have a big thank you to my snapper and to my holder, Matt Hawk. And that I kind of wondered, was that kind of a low-key shade
probably
throwing at Bojorquez of like, hey, we saw the videos of his misses where Bojorquez had the laces in and how frustrating that was, in that, I'm not saying that Matt Hawk was the reason Jason Sanders was such a phenomenal kicker in Miami. He's a great kicker, but it helps when you have a super consistent, good holder. So I don't know that it's that simple, Kevin, that's the reason that they signed Hawk, but it was a factor. It certainly was part of the reason that
it might have been the reason they moved on.
Yes, if they could net out the punting and this was the benefit, I certainly don't think that's out of the realm of possibility.
Sure.
So our final portion before we close out here, anything specific you're looking for in the game this coming week that you either didn't have a chance to see yet or you're looking forward to seeing against the Chicago Bears this Saturday afternoon?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to, not seeing any major starters. I don't need it. I don't need it the whole preseason. I heard some guys on the radio, Steve Tasker was talking about how, if the other teams have 1.5 quarters of real live action and the Bill Stars have no quarters, and it's like we're a month away from seeing real football. I don't know that a drive or two makes the difference for me. It doesn't make any difference for me. So I don't want to see any of the starters. That's number one. What I am interested to see is I think the Bears in the game that I saw against the Dolphins, at least that starting unit, they got after Tua a little bit. They got some pressure on Tua. So I want to see how the Bills offensive line, whether I don't believe that Dawkins is going to play, so I think you're still going to probably have Bobby Hart out there, but I think the rest of that offensive line unit, a guy like Cody Ford and even John Feliciano, I want to see how they hold up against this Bears defense, because I thought they got some pressure on Tua, so I want to see how the Bills hold up against a defensive line from the Bears that can get some pressure and present some problems, and that'll be interesting for me. And then outside of that, like I said, to see when Justin Fields comes in. As a football fan, I predicted Fields to be the best quarterback from that class in terms of, I think, team success. I think he's in a position where he can have success early and often. And I like his style of play. I think he's in that same breed of a Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes type. I don't know if he'll get to those levels, but that's the new NFL quarterback. And I think he fits all those boxes. So I'm excited just to see him as a football fan, but also to see how this depth of the defensive line is able to handle a quarterback that can extend plays. We saw him extending plays against the Dolphins like crazy and making some pretty impressive plays. So I'm interested to see how the defense and the depth of the defense handles that type of quarterback, because you're seeing more and more of these guys throughout the league, and it's great that you can get in a pocket passer like Goff's face, but Goff's kind of more of a throwback to how quarterbacks used to play versus Fields coming in and showing you how quarterbacks play nowadays. And I think you have to be able to defend that. So I'm interested to see how they kind of try to rein him in and not allow him to extend plays.
Yeah, I think those are great points. I'm looking to see 0 injuries. I'm looking to see maybe some snaps from Zach Moss.
Yeah.
I'm looking to see, just continued progress from some of the positions we talked about. Do we see a little improvement on the offensive line? Do we see a little improvement from the depth corners? Continued progression from the defensive line? And then The one point that I think is key to look at when you talk about Steve Tasker and that, hey, are they going to get in a sluggish, slow start? The Bills had no preseason last year, no joint practices with other teams. And in the first 4 games, this came out and scored 27, 31, 35, and 30. They were just fine. They were hit the ground running, averaging 400 plus yards a game. It's just not necessary. They have the most continuity in the NFL. Same GM, same head coach, same offensive coordinator, same defensive coordinator, same quarterback coach, same quarterback, same offensive line, same receivers. You don't need it. Like, they absolutely are going to be fine. I won't be upset if in the third game against the Packers that they get a quarter or two, a couple of drives to warm things up, especially because I'll be there and be able to watch. It'd be fun to see. But I won't be heartbroken at all if none of them play a single snap and we just don't see any Josh Allen, any Deon Dawkins, any Stephon Diggs, any Emmanuel Sanders. I don't need to see it. I'll be totally fine.
Yeah, I think one thing that we really haven't talked about at all that I would like to see in this next game here is Gabe Davis. I'd like to see a Gabe Davis sighting of doing some things. I think that we saw him have a good first season and have some production, but I want to see, with all these other starters not out there, that he steps up and is able to be sort of the leader in that next tier of the wide receiver room with the starters, whoever they are that are out there for this next week. So I'd like to see that.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to go through, and we'll see where things wrap up. I'm really excited to be able to move forward and get to real football that actually counts. Yeah. But we got one more fun game to prep for here this weekend, and we'll have a good time doing it. Make sure you guys are checking out all the shows on the Cover One lineup. We have great coverage. The roundup is off to an awesome start with Rob Quinn and Kyle Salagi. Last night, the guys in the hoof were having a great time. We're going to be here for you all preseason long. Anthony's doing a great job on disguised coverage, and we have the new launch for the Cover One Fantasy Show. Tons of great coverage all the way through. Once we get to the regular season, Aaron and I will be here for you on preview shows Wednesday night and our post-game shows after the game, and we may have a new special guest on our post-game shows after the game. Looking forward to being able to launch that for everybody. I'm really looking forward to it. It's been a great time. Make sure you're checking out our sponsors over at Uncle Jumbo's or Underdog Fantasy. Use the promo code COVER1. Get yourself $25 free when you download the Underdog Fantasy app and do a minimum deposit of $10. You get $25 for free. Come and have some fun being able to go through. Lone Wolf, thank you for checking them out. They're doing an awesome job. Off to a great start of the roundup. Aaron, where can the good people find you?
You can find me here on the show every Wednesday. And like you said, on the post-game show coming up here during the season, you can find me here, my tag. And for those listening, it's at Aaron Quinn 716 on Twitter. And just while you're over here, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We got a ton of content coming your way this season. Every year we seem to add a little bit more to this Cover One team, and I'm just super excited for some of the additions that we have here, not just in the guys that you see our faces here on the podcast and hear us on the voice, but the writers that we've brought in and just this team in general that Eric's assembled. It's just a great group of guys, really smart football guys. So I'm excited for the content ramping up as we get closer to the season here. So make sure that you're subscribed and following and have your notifications turned on across social media, across all your apps and podcast platforms. So make sure you're following everybody and what we're doing, because it's going to ramp up to a really great season here.
Absolutely. You can come find me at Greg Tompsett, having a good time on Twitter, having a good time on the Cover One Slack channel. And like Aaron said, check out everything that we have going on. The articles on the website have been just killer, brought in so much talent on top of the guys that you may know of. A lot of guys grinding behind the scenes to be able to bring out more and more. So just appreciate everything that you're doing. And as Anthony says here, I know it sounds cheesy. We don't ask for it a lot. Give us some help with the likes, ratings, reviews. We're actually doing a contest. If you give us a review on iTunes, we're going to be giving away tickets to the Packers game. We're going to be picking that out here in the next couple games, or next couple days. Come on. Aaron and I are both going to be there at the game, be able to have some fun. We'll wave and say hi to you. Looking forward to being able to go out there, but it really helps us to be able to, just get eyeballs on new people that haven't had a chance to listen to what we have going on, haven't listened to the other shows. It really helps us out. So if you have a minute, give us a like, give us a rating, give us a review, subscribe to the show, tell a friend or a neighbor about the show. It really means a lot. But on behalf of Aaron Quinn, I am Greg Tompsett. You have been listening to the Cover One Buffalo podcast, and we